we are going to be considering the impact of giving Africa the internet from a perspective based around Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Maslow wanted to find out what motivated people and what were the unconscious desires behind these needs. He identified the priority in which the needs should be met accordingly and set them out in an order in which people would achieve them. He also stated that fulfilling later needs without the basics would prove ineffective, as people would not be able to focus on what was required of them to maintain these needs due to the lack of basic requirements.
The base of this hierarchy included the basic physiological needs any creature needed to fulfill in order to survive. Without this, a creature would not survive and inevitably become extinct. In the West, these needs were given and survival is a human right.
The second level of the hierarchy involves sustaining of life beyond the physiological needs. Obtaining the requirements of the base of the hierarchy does not guarantee a full life, but extends and increases the quality of the life lived.
The third part of the hierarchy is based completely on a social and emotional level, and can be argued only applies to human beings, considering animals are seen to work on the simple instincts to survive and breed. These are not required for the living of a full life, but are seen to as being important, as humans as a majority seek companionship.
The fourth area of the hierarchy is a step up from the love and belonging level, as it is moving past simply having the relationships with those close and having a need to be accepted by all. Although this is not required for any form of survival, it is deemed necessary for humans to make a positive contribution.
The top of the hierarchy is not achieved by all in their lifetimes, but is seen to be the end result of the journey, with nowhere else to move on to aside from the maintenance of the other levels. It involves no survival, but more of an expression of oneself and one's own being.
In the West, however, as we've become more technologically advanced, we've become more dependent on things such as the internet and computers, not for survival, but for an easier way of living. Because Maslow's hierarchy of needs was created so long before humans became so dependent on technology, it does not consider their use and applicability to achieve these needs, and would therefore be seen as a luxury. It was not a necessity for humans to achieve self-actualization, and therefore can still be achieved without it. Hiltz identifies that the ease of access for people has no boundaries. Although this can be seen as an incredible step forward in making people's lives easier, it's also worth noting that without this access, people may become lost in a world where they have to manually find information.
The UNDP state that the HDI is a summary measure for assessing long-term progress in 3 basic dimensions of human development: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living. We will use the Maslow perspective to look at the HDI as a measure of the quality of life in terms of having the population's hierarchy fulfilled. The higher the HDI, the higher people are generally in terms of the hierarchy. For the purpose of a fair comparison, we have selected 5 African countries and 5 Western countries at random for comparison in terms of their HDIs in 1980, 1990, 2000 and 2012. We have done this to establish where the countries were initially, where they stood a year before the creation of the internet, and the most recent HDI.
By analysing these tables, it can be seen that the selected African countries had no strict pattern of progression, with some countries moving backwards after the release of the internet and some beforehand, implying that the internet had no impact on their HDIs, although this could be due to the countries not having access to the internet even after its release.
Using data from MASLOW'S, a demonstration of how unconnected Africa is in comparison to the rest of the world has been created. Here is a pie chart to show what percentage of internet users are in Africa. Considering that Africa accounts for 15% of the human population, it can be seen that those connected does not reflect the rest of the global population. When compared to the percentage of people in Europe and the USA, the West, against Africa, it can be seen there is not much difference in actual population size. Further from this, comparing the selected Western and African countries and what percentage of the global internet users they account for demonstrates greater inequalities when considering that it is 5 randomly selected Western countries against 5 African countries.
Comparing the countries further to demonstrate the difference in population shows a large difference in all countries. When comparing the number of internet users in the countries, the levels in difference are dramatic, with all African countries aside from Kenya being barely visible against the Western majorities. Although Kenya has more internet users than Sweden, when viewed as a percentage of population, it is worth noting that Sweden has a higher penetration of users amongst the selected countries, with just over 700,000 people being unconnected.
Maslow stated that it is necessary to look for cross-cultural species characteristics and an expectancy for cultural relativism. It seems clear that we do what we do because we've been brought up in that manner based on our cultures.
Large companies like Microsoft, for example, have seen some benefits in putting the internet into Africa for free using solar arrays and other technologies. However, Maslow stated that physiological needs must be fulfilled before progress towards self-actualization can be made. Microsoft's plans, according to Kurtis, is to provide free internet access to rural areas of Africa using their own technology, which would allow users to access the internet using any device with Wi-Fi. This would attract large businesses and provide opportunities to the people of Africa, but it is not disclosed by Microsoft what its true motives are. Were Microsoft intent on helping Africa progress, from a Maslow perspective, it would first ensure that all prior needs are met.
Rowan states, you need only look at the map of huge broadband fibre optic cables currently being laid on both east and west coast from Djibouti to Dakar to understand how quickly and ambitiously an entire continent is being connected. He goes on to identify the interest in Africa, stating that David Cameron is so keen to give British entrepreneurs a foothold that he recently took a high-level delegation of corporate CEOs to highlight one of the greatest economic opportunities on the planet. This gives insights into the ulterior motives of these organisations in bringing Africa into the digital age, and that the motives of these companies trying to improve the quality of life for those in Africa of what we in the West deem to be important: ease of access.
Shields identified that Western societies are trying to apply their ideals, based around ICT advances, to developing countries such as Africa without considering their needs. He also notes that countries normally base their ICT values on what they perceive to be a positively impacting policy. Pratt Adams argued that not implementing ICT-based systems into developing countries would create a digital divide which would make the line between rich and poor much clearer. However, Pratt Adams does not consider the differences in culture or values of a country, which may make a country's ideal ICT policy differ from our Western ideals. The main criticism of Maslow's work is that it was only applied to the US. Kitayama and Marcus demonstrated that positive feelings in American students were associated with personal achievements, whereas Japanese students associated positive feelings with having good relations. This can be used to demonstrate the cultural difference in what is deemed to be important, and thus what would be higher in the hierarchy.
Another major criticism is that Maslow's research into self-actualised people was based around people that he deemed to be self-actualised, such as Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, and William James. From these people, he created a list of 15 characteristics. Jarvis criticises further, saying that Maslow's research into self-actualised people was not carried out systematically, and the only criterion for identifying a self-actualised person was Maslow's personal appraisal of them. According to MacLeod, Maslow's basis for self-actualised people was through reading biographies of these people, a process which would be biased from the author's perspective and subjective from Maslow's.
The idea that one cannot fulfil higher level needs before prior needs are met is an argument that can be disproven through basic human nature. MacLeod found through the use of observation that people in poverty still achieve needs within the love and belonging level. The basic needs are essential for survival, but people can go without them for periods of time, while still achieving other needs.
Maslow's work has aided educators to establish particular characteristics in students to best teach them. Snowman and Baylor established through the use of Maslow's hierarchy that until learners feel safe and part of a group, they will not have satisfied more basic needs and therefore cannot be expected to focus on higher intellectual interests. However, it could be argued that because Maslow's hierarchy of needs is an idea from several decades before the internet and it was only applied to the US, and that the top of the hierarchy is based around Maslow's own beliefs of people that are seen to be self-actualised, that the hierarchy has very little application in today's day and age.
Considering the HDIs to be accurate in determining an individual's quality of life in a country begs the question, why hasn't Africa achieved as the West has? The Western countries' HDIs were generally double that of those in Africa, both before and after the internet. This implies that the internet has had little or no impact on the dimensions considered for HDIs in African countries.
It is argued from Maslow's perspective, because the Western countries had already fulfilled their physiological and safety needs before the internet, as demonstrated by their high HDI scores, that they used the internet as a means to create the final step towards better quality and easier lives. On the other hand, the African countries in question had not yet had these basic needs fulfilled for the majority of their population, and therefore would have no use for the internet until these needs were met. However, it is worth noting that the HDI does not take into account the cultural view of what a quality life is. One of the main repercussions of the internet being implemented into Africa is the strong interest of organisations in globalising countries rich with resources. Kelly identified while Zambia was under British rule, some education was provided by missionaries and the colonial government. As the economy was heavily focused on copper mining, there was little need for skilled labour, and as a result, only 961 Zambians in the entire country finished secondary education at the time of independence. This highlights the negative impact that globalisation has on countries and the developing world, through the exploitation of the workforce, trained to do a sole job. Maslow would argue that these organisations are overruling Maslow's hierarchy of needs to ensure their own motives are fulfilled. The hierarchy of needs would place employment provided by these new organisations in the category of safety, but without physiological needs and other safety needs met, this would not entirely benefit the individual, and the provided internet would not be of use.
In terms of education, the internet would be an endless source of learning materials. Shields believed that education played a pivotal role in the new development sector. Rostow's modernisation theory stipulates that investments in education in third world countries would put third world countries on the path of development. eventually transforming them into industrialised societies similar to those in Western Europe and North America. With Shield's ideas in mind, Wegerif believes that the internet will grant easier access to information, allowing users to replace costly physical items with digital alternatives. In terms of education, this would save a substantial amount of money within the education sectors of Africa, as the need for textbooks would be gone, as resources would be a button press away. Sun believes that people use media such as the internet to achieve interpersonal goals. Although the internet cannot meet the physiological or safety needs of the hierarchy, it can be seen as a means to actually meet the other needs, such as belonging and creativity. In areas of Africa where the basic needs are met, the internet can be seen as having a positive impact on people, creating the ease of access people desire to meet the upper levels of the hierarchy, although Maslow did not believe this was fully possible without the initial levels. From the evidence provided and perspectives considered, it can be said that the Western creation of the HDI is a very biased view of the world, only considering the Western values. This can also be said of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, although Maslow does consider what is essential and places it above activities not oriented around survival. Maslow's hierarchy strictly states that the base needs must be fulfilled before the next level can be addressed. This would mean using the internet wouldn't be of any contribution to the person. However, this is a dated idea that does not take cultural differences into account. Therefore, the internet could be beneficial in helping Africa, as although it may not aid them fully, it could bridge the gap for creating more sustainable living and a Western, better quality of life.